Hello and welcome to this virtual roundtable from Foodservice Consultants Society International, FCSI. Today we are addressing the subject of sustainability with a particular focus on European food service. I'm Michael Jones from Progressive Content and Editorial Director of FCSI's Foodservice Consultant magazine. This roundtable is kindly supported by Welbilt and will explore how sustainability has finally earned its seat at the table and become a genuine hot button issue for the food service industry. We will look at how sustainability is impacting on people, on profits and the planet, and address why operators are acknowledging that equipment and processes that save energy and prevent waste can also save a considerable amount of money in return. The roundtable will focus on the innovation, the best practice, and the new thinking that is helping food service operators to put energy saving at the heart of their operations. I'm delighted to be joined by two of Europe's leading design consultants and the Chief Innovation Officer of one of the food service sector's largest and most diverse food service equipment manufacturers. I will ask each of them now to just introduce themselves and to give us a quick overview of their organisations. Vinoo, can we start with you, please?
Thank you, Michael. My name is Vinoo Mehera. I'm the owner and CEO of promaFox. We're a food service consultant in Switzerland, based in Switzerland. We've been around for the last 30 years. We basically have three pillars. The first being classic consultancy, where we do project-oriented work, concepts, doing a campus strategy, or even doing a foresight into how area of a town. So it's a bit of future-based. The second are, let's say, what I call our bread and butter is classical kitchen design or food service design, kitchen planning. And then finally, last but not least, we have what we call general contractor work, where we actually will do a turnkey project, front of house, back of house, but primarily based on restaurants or a restaurant in a hotel or the kitchens. We would not be building a hotel per se. That's out of our scope. But all tenant works in line with the kitchen side would be covered by us, including the restaurant and everything, working with interior designers. That's a little bit to us. Excellent.
Welcome, Vinoo. Thank you for joining us. And Alexander, please.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Alexander Hofer. I'm the owner and the founder and owner of H44 team, which is based in the north of Italy, exactly near 10 kilometers near to Bolzano in Caldaro. So we basically do consulting and planning of all the back of the house and logistic part for hospitality concepts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alexander. And Rick.
Yeah, again, Rick, Caron, nice to see all of you today. And I meet so many wonderful people through these panels. So thank you, Michael, and thank you to our guests for joining. I've joined Welbilt 15 years as Chief Innovation Officer. Welbilt's broad-based food service equipment company across all the major categories. And prior to that, I was in food service consulting with a focus on convenience stores. Before that, helping to create the category of accelerated cooking, which is a very exciting category these days. And then I was in consulting broad-based. So I really enjoy innovation. I always see innovation as the intersection of food, equipment, and people. And now that we're adding profits and the planet to the discussion, it becomes really exciting.
Excellent. Thank you, Rick. Alexander, let's go straight to you first, if possible, please. As an experienced design consultant in this sector, what for you are the most significant challenges that your operator clients that you work with have faced in order to reduce their energy, their water, their chemical usage? Why is this such a challenge for them?
Yeah, we are very strong, in the luxury and wellness hospitality. So I would say in the last 10, 15 years, it was primarily important to reach qualitative expectations and the focus on the guest as the absolute main actor in the resource. No, and in the meantime, I think this is no longer the goal, but this is an absolute requirement for surviving in this segment. So. It is and is becoming more and more important to recognize where your own USPs are and what is the identity of the house and of the area which you represented. So that's why sustainability is becoming more and more important in all these areas. No, whatever energy saving, waste reduction, and the use of local products. So guests notice this more and more, and they don't want to have a guilty conscience when they're enjoying vacation time, And so for me, it's very clearly the future is digitization and our industry is very backward when it comes to this point, no? So we collect data, and no matter in which area of the house. So that I think that's very important in the future.
Fantastic. Vinoo, Alexander just mentioned there about the future of digitization and how it's kind of changing this sector. In what way has innovation in terms of either new technology or just new thinking helped your clients to navigate some of those challenges that Alexander was describing in order to become more sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, sustainability, I mean, has been around for a long time, but I mean, but I'd say the food service business hasn't been, as I think Alexander was alluding to earlier, not been actually a leader in this space. Yeah? When we look at that, actually, just take a very simple example, induction ovens. They've been around for a long time. But if you look at most of the countries, in Switzerland, it's quite common. And in a lot of the DACH region, or let's say Germany, Austria, etc., it's still also pretty common that one use induction ovens. But in other countries, it isn't. They use gas. Yeah. So alone, starting with such basics, you already see that there. Heat recovery, another example of a technology that's actually very prevalent in the dishwashing area, in the scullery, etc., and all that, is not used, or not used that much, I'm saying, yeah? Because very often it's balancing the cost against that. So there are a number of such technologies that are already existing, which could already go a long way in saving. Another example is remote cooling. When I look at a lot of places, just take a Pret, for example, they use everything with on-site cooling. Now, if you would just simply work here with remote cooling, you would already be far more sustainable and work towards sustainability. Yeah. Something very, quite common in Switzerland, but our costs of building here are much higher. But in a lot of other countries, that's not the case. And I think these technologies, are, just to mention, are already existing, and we could do a lot there. But it starts even a step earlier than that. If you just look at simply planning, and this is where, of course, our role comes in, what Alexander and me do, is if you would simply plan the right size of kitchen instead of over-dimensioning a kitchen, which is another case which happens very often. Simply having ventilation in the right place, that when we are planning and designing a kitchen, there's a ventilation in the right place. We use, sticking by my example earlier, of a on-site cooling fridge, and it's next to an oven, right? There's heat being generated. The fridge doesn't work, means it's overheating. It needs far more electricity and energy in order to cool it, etc., because you haven't put any ventilation above it. These start with simple planning requirements. That's where we can already in the beginning, right at the start, assist in reducing and improving on the whole energy and the sustainability side. But then it goes into the other areas of predictive maintenance. I think Rick, if I'm not mistaken, in one of these shows was mentioning something about this when I was hearing one of your last webcasts. And this is another way where you can, if you would maintain your products properly, and there is technology there for that now, where you would do the right maintenance, you would save on energy costs, you would be requiring less. So all these are things going in that direction. And the other point, which has already been briefly touched upon, is big data. We can now capture this information, analyze this information, measure it, and thereby get behind doing the right things at the right time and utilizing that. And the next step to that will be AI, which is still in its very infancy here, but you would use AI then to analyze that data and maybe then take certain measures which can be automatically and done much more quickly. So I think there's a whole vast area which can be used here, existing technology, designing it correctly, and now new technology which is coming in, which is going to assist in this, along with the Internet of Things. One other point which I had forgotten to mention.
That's an outstanding summation, Vinoo. Thank you very much, Rick. As well as some of the areas that Vinoo has picked up on there, for you, from the perspective of an innovator, what type of technology and equipment has had a major impact on sustainable practices in kitchens in the last couple of years from your point of view? What's really surprised you or impressed you in terms of its application?
I think Vinny said it well in terms of holistic approach to design, and no question with I call them the technologies at the gate that are converging to accelerate all of these great things that can happen around sustainability. They all need to be in the right balance, and it starts with design. From an equipment manufacturer, we do our best in providing the best equipment solutions that can be part of a design, but it's still up to the designer to take that equipment and put it together holistically. So in terms of the equipment itself, but we also want it to be expandable and modular. Ventless is a really big deal, understanding the ventilation system in kitchens, the balance point, the airflows. I mean, many buildings actually, if you understand the thermal balance point, you can reduce heating and cooling by properly optimizing the amount of fresh air coming into the building, which is really good given that we're still operating in the shadow of the pandemic and there's new regulations around airflow exchanges. I think zero standby loss is a big deal. A lot of this equipment consumes energy when it's not cooking, and it doesn't need to. So how do we think about cold start cooking? RFID, we talked about all these technologies, IoT, but sensor technology is really important because it's the sensors that send the information to the cloud for processing. So with RFID, you can track food, food consumption, food waste, food holding, and the digital side is definitely going to provide all those tools. And so, a simple ice machine, people think of that as, you just make ice and put it in the bin, but it's a thermal storage device. And really, the ice machine shouldn't be making ice during a busy, high electric time of use, time of day. It should make it when the electric rate is low. And then use the bin as a thermal storage system. In terms of surprises, I'm really amazed at digital technology in terms of motors, compressors, drive systems. They're getting smaller and more effective. They allow the designer to make the equipment smaller and more flexible. And a recent project that really surprised me was replacing nitrous oxide that's in whipped cream. Whipped cream is used in a lot of fancy coffee drinks, and nitrous oxide is terrible for the environment. It's got a very high global warming index. You can actually make whipped cream using air and make this in situ inside of beverage systems. And it has a big, big impact on reducing global warming. So I was actually surprised that the adoption and the thought process around changing a whipping gas agent. We all know that's happening on the refrigeration side, but I never thought I would see it happen on whipped cream. So those are some of the examples, Michael.
Some great examples, and amazing to see some examples there that have some serious innovation behind them, and some just smart ideas that can make a very, very big difference. Rick, I'd like to stay with you for a moment, and then we'll bring Vinoo and Alexander into the same question. But what do you believe has been then the catalyst for accelerating development in energy efficient innovation in food service? Is it fundamentally the ecological imperative? So looking at things like younger customer bases and a demographic that I think Alexander mentioned, they see it as an absolute requirement that we care about the planet and will vote with their feet if an operator does not act sustainably. Is it more about the cost savings to be had here? Is it all of the above? And also, what will continue to drive that growth? What are the big drivers behind it?
Yeah. Well, I'm a chemical engineer by training, and the word catalyst is it's a material that reduces the activation energy so a chemical reaction can go forward. So if there's a large hump, the catalyst brings down the hump. And so I'm not sure that there's one catalyst, right, that's reducing that. Vinny mentioned that sustainability has been around for a long time, and it has been, but the glaciers have been melting for a long time, right? And so I think all of these things, the global climate change, the younger generation, investors who care about sustainability, and as they develop their portfolios, they want to invest in companies that are good for the planet. I think back when I started 20, 30 years ago, there was a bit of a stigma, to being a tree hugger or an earthy, crunchy type. That's not a stigma anymore. In fact, the younger people expect it. So I think that if I had to pick one area around catalyst, I think it's the changing consumer base. They're demanding it. Investors are requiring it. And these technologies that we discussed are accelerating it. The key is that the economics need to drive the adoption of it in the end of the day. And there's some very positive, favorable economics, but the financial business case will, if I pick one thing for the catalyst, it would probably be that, bringing visibility to financial business cases to make it happen.
Brilliant. Alexander, Vinoo, do you want to add to that and talk about the sort of the key drivers that you're seeing from the point of view of working with your clients?
Well, customer extends pressure, no, to the designer side, to the producer side. For example, I think logistic and food industry is always faster than the rest. So I suppose that it is. So, but what it mean if this pressure come only from the customer side, you are always running back a train, no? So that's what I think. I would like really companies to show more courage and commitment in these things, no? So because it not can be all longer about profit optimization. So I think the young generation is quite right putting our current system on a question and on a test. So we want to continue to enjoying ourselves and by eating and drinking high quality, but sustainability will play a crucial role. So we're speaking many times about this, but I think it's not enough what you do.
Vinoo, do you agree with Alexander there? Do you believe that not enough is being done, that we need to keep those key drivers in place?
Yes, I think more has to be done. I mean, in the end, as Rick correctly said, it, dollars and cents need to happen, as one says, and I don't mean cents with C, but with S. That when the P&L starts to structure up, because we see it, a typical small restaurant is not interested right now in these sustainable measures because he sees it as a cost. And I think it's the understanding of it, how it also works. There is a lack of understanding. They see immediately the investment cost. They do not look at the operating costs. The first thing they look at is when they're looking at something, oh, this hob or this oven or this thing costs me much more. I'd rather not take a product from a good recognized brand which has already got energy saving concepts in it, but let me go and take something which is cheaper because it's still going to last me probably as long, but it doesn't have the energy savings. It doesn't bring the same energy reductions because it has no top technology in it, etc. So they're only looking for, they're not looking at the other costs later on, that their electrical costs, that their other energy costs are going to be higher, or that they're forcing their staff to shut it on and off, or that they have too many different types of equipment there, as opposed to using, maybe I just take one example of like an iVario, which could do various things, as opposed to having two, three different types of equipment, thereby generating far more energy costs. So I think it's until that understanding sinks in and people realize that balance. And for that, we will need a bit the carrot and stick. We will need legislation, government, to actually force some of that with new legislation. Some of that might be with a carrot. Some of that will be with a stick, where if you don't meet these requirements, you will have a problem. In Switzerland and some other countries, I know this is happening. We have, if you are able to prove the business case that you are replacing equipment with more energy efficient equipment, actually you will get from the companies that are making this equipment, they'll actually give you a subsidy. Right. So they're thereby, that's sort of the carrot approach. So thereby slowly forcing this into the thing. So I think a lot more has to be done until this understanding sinks in. This understanding has not sunk in, because I think for most of people in the food services and for the cooks, it's about, I'm producing you it's about the quality of the food I give you. It's about the great dishes I can serve you. That's in the first line, what they want to show you. And it's not about what I'm saving in the back. That comes more from clients that really understand that, where it's maybe part of their DNA, part of their philosophy, where they want to become energy efficient or have zero carbon emissions, etc. And that only happens in larger clients. Yeah.
Great answer. Thank you, Vinoo. A question really for all of you. I don't know who wants to chip in on this one, but obviously the industry is still facing the extraordinarily challenging headwinds of the pandemic at the moment. Do we believe that a sustainable way of working for restaurants has been put back at all by COVID? And do we feel it might have an impact on how sustainable operations will be in the future as well? How much of an impact has it had?
I would say that the industry is bouncing forward in this regard. Obviously, with COVID, there was some very urgent measures that needed to be taken to increase the resilience to infectious disease in food service. And that's happened. It's going to continue to happen. I think the shadow of the pandemic is going to be with us well into the decade around preventative measures. Sustainability initiatives are actually accelerating as a result. With younger decision makers coming in, we talked a little bit about regulation, and I think that that's going to be a two-edged sword. I think it's needed, but it needs to be done in just the right way. Way back in my career, I wrote minimum efficiency standards for the U.S. government, for the Federal Trade Commission. And I remember 25 years old standing on stage telling the OEMs that the government's going to legislate minimum efficiencies. And all of a sudden something flew by my head. It was a tomato. Somebody from the audience didn't like the idea that the government was getting involved. But thank God the government did, because now there's standards. There's ASTM standards for testing equipment. Before that, it didn't happen. So part of that is around education and adoption. But the short answer is I think, no, I don't think COVID took away from it. I think it created a sense of urgency to get on with it.
Yeah. Great answer. Thank you, Rick. Alexander, Vinoo's already referred to essentially how it's making consultants think about the design of kitchens, back of house areas, front of house areas. Are kitchens, from your point of view, now being fundamentally redesigned to accommodate a more energy efficient way of working? If so, how is it impacting on design? Is it simply about getting better, smarter equipment in place in the same footprint?
First of all, I just come back to that what Rick says before. I think I agree totally, because I think that COVID has and will not affect that. I think it's the necessity and it's a challenge for our generation, though, to go on this way. As with everything, COVID was an accelerator to show us failures and to make things better, and we should see it as opportunity. And back to your question, well, both are the case, because let me explain this briefly, just using two examples. Italy is trying to promote the Hotel 4.0 through tax breaks and contributions. In this case, the motivation of an investment is in sustainability, and it's just a hard word in English. So digitization, okay, comes because you are financially rewarded for it, and the prerequisite for this is that you have used more intelligent systems and devices. Sure, this has an influence on our design and on our projects. But then there is a second, in my opinion, much more sensible motivation to invest in this technology. It comes from a sustainable thought, which is also connected to other approaches and solutions. For example, we try to motivate operation of ski resorts and lifts to run several restaurants in the mountains to produce that in the valley, so in central kitchens. So here these tools helps us enormously to make our job better in gastronomy. So the evaluation of weather data, of record the customer behavior, they are really near to 100%. So production can be adapted. So this is the best possible way that we leave a large part of waste in the valley and prevent unnecessary delivery routes, for example. Another positive side effect is that the ability to plan working hours. So this is particularly important because we are currently suffering a lot with shortage of skilled workers in our sector. So, and I think we have unbelievable and incredible potential in these things.
Great answer. Thank you, Alexander. And Vinoo, same sort of question to you, really. How is this changing attitude to sustainability affecting how you design a back of house or front of house area with regards to things like flow? So what has changed, if anything, in terms of your design rationale?
I think quite a lot has changed. I mean, if we look at the way today we are planning, we are tending now to optimize the size of kitchens. That means the back of house is becoming always smaller. Technology is allowing that as well. So, you can have equipment that is multifunctional and thereby allows you to do more with much less machinery, with much less equipment. This is key. Yeah. So we see now more space up front. Previously you said 50, 55, 45. Typically that was front of house to back of house. Now we're seeing more 60 front of house, 40 back of house. Yeah. And that's a big difference. And when you look at that now, COVID's come into place. I think the front of house is going to become even more important, not because previously it was about optimizing how many seats I can have there, but it's going to become sort of remains the same, but you need more space now because people don't want to anymore sit cramped up right next to each other. So you will need to free up more space in front. So that's one area where we're seeing. The other one, I think, very important point, what we're seeing when we are planning kitchens and designing them, is flexible and mobility. Yeah, that the kitchen can be used very quickly, that's more flexible, and that you use far more mobile equipment. Very typical here in Switzerland, everything is built in. So the whole buffet is built in, it's all done in. That means tomorrow, if I change my concept, I have to remove all that stuff. I might have to drill new holes in the floor for sewage water, for electricity. In other words, I have to bore more holes. And all these drive costs. So my technical costs go up massively. So this is another area which is demanding a big change. And we've gone further on that because right now, in our case, promaFox, we are right now in the process of actually looking at how you build the whole kitchen. So we are right now in a feasibility study in which we're looking at the whole kitchen build. In other words, the walls, the floor, and the ceiling are going to be built in such a manner that it's a sort of a modular build that we're looking at, in which you can reuse the walls. So I'm talking sustainability and flexibility times two. This way, you're offering them much, much more flexibility and mobility, which is becoming very key. For me, it's always what brought us to think on that is, I always think along the lines, front of house is always a bit like a stage. It's changed very quickly. Back of house, can I change it in one day? Can I change it in 2 days and change the whole look and feel? And what brought me on this was once, I think it was McDonald's once, where within 1 day in some shopping center in Japan, set up the whole McDonald's, and they did it. And it got me thinking, why can't we do that in normal kitchens? Can we not make the back of house as well like a stage where I can just flexibly change on the go, more or less? It's a little more challenging than that because you've got water and ventilation and walls and stuff to be borne in mind. So how can we do that? And we're right now in the midst of a feasibility study doing such kitchens, what we call plug and play kitchens. I know that's and trying to build exactly on that to take this to the next step. So that's where our thinking is going at promaFox, to try and help this and help the operators work better.
Fantastic! Some really exciting and interesting initiatives there. Looking forward to hearing how they pan out. Rick, moving on. We've already mentioned a couple of elements here, but how can things like AI, IoT, automation, robotics, or things like blockchain even help us ultimately to be more sustainable? How can they contribute?
Yeah, just before I answer the question, I love the concept of the plug and play. And I think that would also play out in QSR in a very significant way, because ultimately, even our equipment, we're trying to get there through flexible platforms. So the equipment, people will say cradle to grave, and then you have to dismantle it. Cradle to cradle is a better approach, I think, for our equipment, because our equipment should last 10 years and we can change the electronic controls, the software, the magnetrons, the heating elements, and keep it going for a long time. Coming back to the question of AI, we talked about quality of the food and the experience. And so AI can definitely lead to a step change in quality. One that I'm very proud of, on our fryers, we have an oil quality sensor that measures the contaminant level of the oil, total polar materials. Now, it's expensive. Not everybody can afford it. But with AI, you can predict the total polar materials of the oil and help the operator figure out when to filter, when to discard. In fact, if you get it just right, you never have to throw away oil. So that's an example of smart cloud-based systems enabled through AI, and it leads to better decisions for people. So at the end of the day, whether or not it's saving energy or saving food, people need to make better decisions, and they're on cognitive overload trying to run these restaurants. And so anything that leads to what I would call invisible automation or cognitive automation to make better decisions when running the kitchens will save waste, will improve sustainability. I think, in the past we talked about blockchain and people are familiar with that around food safety, but I also think probably later in the decade, blockchain will come on where the energy history, the energy footprint is known. And there's already an evolving economy around carbon credits. So just like we've got cryptocurrency now, there's carbon credit currency, right? And blockchain is going to help us understand what companies are sustainable and committed and what companies aren't, right? So they're going to bring truth to this whole very important subject for the planet. And so, yeah, I think AI, blockchain, all the digital technologies that we talked about are coming on, and it's a matter of integrating them into the design so that the kitchens are smart cloud based. That means they're flexible, right? They're modular, they change based on the experiences consumers want, because we don't really know what those experiences are going to be in 2025. We know they're going to be different, and we know many of the investments we're making, the equipment needs to be in place in 2025. So flexibility is so important to make it future-proof.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rick. A question for both Vinoo and for Alexander. In your experience, what kind of clients or sectors in particular like to embrace innovation that can make them more sustainable? Particular sectors, Alex, you mentioned you work in kind of luxury and wellness to a large degree. Is it a sector that's particularly keen to embrace innovation?
Our clients in particular are really motivated for investments. You know, still you see it in this COVID time, so that we don't quit to work. We had a lot of projects we go on because, you know, it's a lot of competition into these structures, and I like really the thought from Vinoo before, because I think the future is in the people which thinks outside the box, you know, and we have a big responsibility, because after the technology from swimming pools and sauna and wellness areas, our resource of back of the house, kitchens, buffets, refrigeration, it's the most expensive part in investment of a structure. So it's really interesting what you said before, guys, because we sometimes, you know, it's the same when I start to be consultant. The first thing I changed is in the exhibitions which I go to visit. So I don't go only to visit exhibitions for our sector. I think out of the box. I go to see other exhibitions which has nothing to do with our sector. So because we have to think out of the box. And so this is what I like in this concept. And I think at the end of the day, we need more data. You know, I think we need in every structure we make, in every project we have to think before we have to make a digital twin. You know, what can we do to make things happen that operators has automatically some recommendation to let things happen? Because the job repeats daily, every day, and we make the same mistakes too many times, you know, and even in planning and even so, that if we want to develop really in the sector, we have to understand much better what's going on. So that's what I think. And then if we have this digital twin with the investors and our clients to invest in new technologies and in new solutions.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When we design equipment, we have a digital twin of the equipment. You know, it's all done parametrically, and now we've got the thermal model. So this equipment exists in the cloud virtually, and you can actually run simulations and troubleshoot it that way. And now it's always different than the physical manifestation. You know, it's a tool, but I think more and more kitchens are going to be simulated, and every day is a learning operation inside a kitchen. So anytime there's a disruption, it's an opportunity for learning. And so really the kitchens become learning, you know, environments where the operators are given the tools. And it's much more fun to work in a kitchen when every day becomes better and better and you're accumulating knowledge. There's pride that comes with that job. So I really completely see, you know, the future around digital twins.
Fantastic. Let's focus on a completely different area of the industry for a moment now, and let's try and get your perspectives on the growth of plant-based diets and alternative proteins, cultivated meats, lab-grown proteins, that kind of thing. Do you see huge potential in these markets? We're tracking a lot of increased growth in terms of menus that are focused on plant-based. Do you think meat will increasingly be off the menu in the next decade? Is that something that will chime with your experience, Vinoo?
I think we will definitely see a mix, and this changing rapidly. I mean, one along the environment is not allowing us to produce that amount of meat or that certain food simply because of the size of our planet. and the growing population. So we will have to find alternatives. So I think alternatives are happening. It's not happening at a fast enough pace. We're seeing that. I mean, Israel is a big leader in this space. If one looks into this area, just as you were correctly mentioning earlier, one has to look outside of the box and not just focus in one area. I think this is something that will happen, and it will change the whole food services area. So whether we like it or not, it's coming. Then there's the generation difference. Generation Z, etc., are looking at more plant-based foods because they're more interested in the environment, etc., and about more sustainable food. So I think this is going to happen and is already happening. It's a question of the pace at which it can happen, and we will see that. But I think the pace will dramatically rise, and I think COVID has been a cause of that as well, and we'll be pushing that. There we will see a rise in that. And the other part is also the cost of it. I think what we're going to see is food's becoming very expensive. Meat is becoming very expensive. I think we're going some ways like almost backwards in time, where only the rich could afford it. And there was a long period in which it was very sustainable for a lot of people. But if you looked how that meat was produced, I won't go into the gory details of how it happens in China, etc., with the chickens and all that stuff. I mean, we've seen enough films on that. That is shocking people and making us slowly more and more aware that it's not only about a cost, but there's also about something about the environment and about the humanity of it. I think it being about more humane. And I think that's slowly sinking in, because initially it was all about simply this money. If I can get it cheaper, who cares? I'm getting meat which I couldn't afford earlier. I think that's changing. That thought is slowly changing. And as that thought process changes, we will definitely see more of this happening at a faster pace. And as we've already mentioned earlier, at the end of the day, it's all about value for money.
Yeah. Alexander, is that your experience too? Are you seeing a rapid rise in plant-based menus for the clients you work with, or is it more a sort of a gradual increase?
You know, we have nearly 8 billion of people in our planet, so expecting that we reach the 10 billions in 2050. So, but my opinion is that meat won't go away from the menu, and why should that be? So we have the same problems worldwide with areas where we produce vegetables and fruits. So because the earth and the areas are over fertilized and over exited. I don't know if I used the right words in English, but you know, this is a problem, no? So of course we have to deal more and more with how we can feed ourselves, no, in the future. So there will be alternative production, which still now are working really good. For example, fish with aquaponic or greens with microgreens, and I think there are solutions. And here is the same, no. We have to think a little bit more out of the box, but we have solutions. And we are currently working on a project which is so fantastic, so interesting. And Italy has fantastic mind for this food sector and for this food development. And our responsibility is not our competence, but it's very interesting for us to work in this project.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. Turning to the subject of food waste, a question really for you, Alexander and Vinoo, really, but as consultants, you must get to see firsthand how operators are struggling with the issue of food waste and how wasted food ultimately leads to wasted money. So before we even get to the problem of the environmental impact, from a consultant's point of view, how bad is the issue of food waste for operators? How is it affecting their bottom line?
I think it's definitely impacting them. I think you've got to differentiate at which level you're looking at, what type of, if you're looking at the smaller restaurants, I think you'll see it is impacting them. But I think, again, it starts at how do you plan it? If you plan a restaurant properly, if the whole kitchen area is planned properly, from the delivery, from the clean zone and unclean zone, from the type of fridges that you have, the right cold storage for milk, for meat, for fish and such products, etc. If that's done correctly from the start, you're already taking a major step towards food waste. Yeah. It then goes further from your whole ordering process right down then to your menu planning process, etc. But the factor human being, the human, it plays a very, very big role here. So there's technology on one side which is coming and becoming more and more common. I'll come to that. But if we already look at what we have, the biggest chunk of this is the human, and it's about how far are they willing to go in this process? Are they willing to actually see that their kitchens are properly planned? Are they willing to invest in the right training of their staff and making them aware? Are they willing to invest in making their customers aware of what's happening. This is a part which needs to be focused upon. Alone that start, if they did, would already impact their wallet quite dramatically. Before even going into more fancy stuff of what we've been talking about of technology, big data, measuring the information that we are receiving, which is all happening and coming. And smart kitchens in the professional space will become more and more common, where you use this digital knowledge and actually analyze it and thereby have more data which you can measure upon and take the correct decisions. Alone, if we start with that, it would help us a lot. So yes, we are seeing this happen with the clients, but again, it's a matter of with which client you are. Clients which understand that have already good organizations behind them because they're larger, they have a large amount of restaurants or chains, etc. They're more aware of this and they're more tuned to it. And they are already looking at that because it's all about their own P&L, and they probably have some finance guy and some logistics person and someone in the ordering process who's looking in very, very fine tooth comb into this detail and saying, guys, you need to do this, you need to do that. The small restaurateur, he's focusing on totally different things and doesn't look at that. And in Europe, we have a lot more of that than maybe in the US or to some extent even the UK. We have a lot more individual restaurants than big groups. So I think a whole new thought process needs to come there to assist these people in how they do that.
Alexander, would you agree with that? I mean, obviously chefs don't want to waste food. So how can that philosophy that Vinoo was just talking about be capitalized upon?
Yeah, thank you for this asking this question, Mike. I think it's really important. I think we are a generation after the post-war generation, which are still shaped by the fact that there were food shortages, and so now we have seen an enormous increase in our standard of living in Central Europe, I would say in the whole world, no? So over the past 15, 20 years. So unfortunately, this also meant that we become more eaters, no, than conscious consumers. So it's not longer a question of feeling hungry. We have enough to eat, no. And only when we become aware what that food and good food, it's important for our body and this nutrition, no, that this is the medicine, then we automatically rise again to appreciate food more. The attitude will lead huge reduction of waste, because this has to change. We have less respect from food.
Absolutely. Rick, what role do food service equipment manufacturers have to play here to move that conversation forward? What else can you do to help operators?
Well, what we try and do is play a role of education. Obviously, the equipment just needs to be flexible, modular, energy efficient. We try and do the best job we can. And so, whether or not on a prior panel around healthcare, I remember, and we were just talking about nutrition, that, if the food comes back on the platter, the patient, the consumer hasn't actually received the proper nutrition, and then it results in waste. So in theory, there should be no food waste. We don't have accidents in our factories these days because we really focus on that. And every person is different. And so I think it starts with education. As knowledge becomes actionable, we need to make sure we have the equipment in place for that to happen. There was comment about induction being around for a long time, and we acquired some induction technologies a long time ago. But then I find out last week that even in the UK, the country of the gas hob, that's potentially going away, moving to induction. So we've got different adoption curves, and I think what we need to do as an equipment manufacturer is just make sure that the education around what the equipment can do is easy to understand, and that it works itself into the design process to break up the silos that occur in the industry to create these holistic solutions. I think that the other thing, is just being public about this. So for our digital equipment, we plant a tree for every connected device. So we're going to be at 3 million connected devices by 2024. We'll have 3 million trees planted. So this is an outward sign of what can happen. That really helps. There's other companies that we work with. There's a company out of New York City called City Harvest. And what they do is they harvest food that would have otherwise been wasted. Millions of pounds a year of good food go back into the city to help people. And so it's a holistic view, but it starts with education and then action, taking action on things that are important. And the last thing I'd say is alignment, alignment with the leadership team of our company on why these things are important, so we get on and do it.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Rick. I'd like to just end really on a question that hopefully you can all answer. And it's just a general question. Rick, there, I loved your your 3-point plan there, the education, action and alignment. Looking at that, what does the future look like for eradicating waste and inefficiency in commercial kitchens? And are you all positive that operators will continue to act more sustainably and that the initiatives that we've just discussed today will make the right sort of impact? If you could all answer that question. Alexander, let's start with you, please.
It's becoming rare and more expensive, so we have to take care about our resources of this planet. So that's out of question.
Excellent. Thank you. Vinoo?
Yeah, I'm sure it will work. I mean, if you look at, I think Boston Consultancy Group made an analysis that by 2030 we'll have 2.1 billion tons of food waste per year, which means 66 tons. It's not me, this is me quoting off this article, 66 tons per second. That's a huge amount if you look at that, if you just think of that. So I think I'm pretty sure that it'll work, because as we've just heard, we need to help our planet. The awareness is there, the understanding is there, is getting there. But we need to help in educating that. So it is a what I would call a multi-dimensional focus with different stakeholders, and we need to involve these different stakeholders. And there are different levels. I mean, you have the producer, you have the supplier, you have of course, the consumer, you have, of course, us playing that role in the food services space, then us training our employees, finally using technology from big data, etc., or using platforms like Too Good To Go for the food to be not thrown away, but to whatever extent it can be reused. And last but not least, naturally, the role of government, which actually will then legislate certain requirements to us, as what we also heard earlier, thereby allowing us to measure what we're doing. So it's a mix of all these coming together that will help actually us to get there.
Excellent. Thank you, Vinoo. And same question to you, Rick. Are you positive for the future? Do you feel, what does the future look like for eradicating waste and inefficiency in commercial kitchens? And are you positive about that future?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the future in terms of, let's say, 2030, at the end of the decade. I think people, when they go out 5 years, they tend to overestimate what's going to happen. But you go out 10 years, people underestimate. And so, yeah, I'm incredibly optimistic. And one thing that I think COVID taught us is how much people really like to go out to eat. Now that the industry is coming back, it's bouncing forward. And now we've got global supply chain interruptions. Starbucks can't get enough of their ingredients to keep the stores running at the bounce forward rate. And so I think that there's a combination of factors that are occurring. And these items were discussed here on the panel. One is it's all about the experience. Right, the consumer experience. And so back in the day, I remember doing a lot of work around drive-thrus, right? Creating the experience of the drive-thru, which wasn't too good when you drive the car around and there's a dumpster and, there's a Texas crow and eating French fries in the dumpster. So you don't see that anymore because the focus was around the experience, and you can't have food waste go in the dumpster. And regulations played a role because you can't mix that anymore, at least in the United States. I think Carnival cruise lines, they're putting in digesters for organic waste. You go to Tokyo, the Prince hotels, and go into the waste area, and you can eat off the floor. I mean, they've got digesters, composters. The gardeners come pick up the compost, and they basically fertilize all the gardens around the hotel complex. So I think there's a mix of technologies. I like what we said before. It starts with the design. But remember, there's a mega trend. We're all getting older, and the operators are getting younger, and they're more caring about the environment. So I think that we see operators coming in, and owners and investors, that this is front of mind. in Switzerland, there's a Blue Horizon company that has talked about the future of alternate foods, plant-based. It's not just plant-based, because the comment made about plants is absolutely correct. Everything has to be in balance, but it's fungi-based foods, cell-based foods. There's so many different approaches to creating protein. And too much, animal protein is a problem from a health standpoint. I do think animal protein is going to be around as an indulgence, but I think it's going to mix with these other forms of food. And so, just to summarizing, I think it's a matter of optimism and progressive realism of that, leveraging the technologies and the education that the industry wants and is really dying to have as consumers want to go back out and enjoy a food service experience.
I think that's a really uplifting sentiment to close upon. This has been a really engrossing discussion from a superb panel. So Vinoo, Alexander and Rick, my thanks to you all for joining us today. I'd like to also thank Welbilt for their continued support, and thank you for watching. Please stay tuned to FCSI for future events. Thank you.